First, I want to thank Frank Analysis for having me on the show last night. The overall thrust of that show is that voting is useless. I'll let you watch the show yourself. I'll link to it in the show notes. And because voting is useless, we also felt the need to brainstorm a few ways to get out of the mess we're in. We like to be practical thinkers here in the radical left. One point that came up in the discussion is that the reason they keep us poor is so that they can control us, because they'd actually be richer if they didn't control us. But then we'd be out of control, and that would never work, right? Another idea that came up is that our so-called progressives, the Squad and Bernie and others, are useless because they're trapped inside the democratic machine. So I have a couple of articles today that I'll read and then discuss so that we understand better the points that we made last night. Caitlin Johnstone, Poverty is a Weapon of the Powerful. Notes from the Edge of the Narrative Matrix. Learn enough about what's happening in the world and you realize that most people in your society have worldviews that are completely and utterly wrong. This can seem bold, perhaps even arrogant, but if most people weren't deluded about the world wouldn't be so fucked. And it's not that people are dumb. Intelligence has little to do with it. Some of the most intelligent people on Earth promote the same deluded worldviews as everyone else. The problem isn't intellect, it's manipulation, and anyone can be manipulated no matter how smart they are. This mass-scale manipulation is the result of wealthy people buying up narrative influence in the form of media, political influence, think tanks, lobbying, NGOs, etc., in conjunction with the mass-scale manipulations of the powerful government agencies which are allied with them. The powerful work to manipulate the way the general public thinks, acts, and votes to ensure that they remain in power. They pay special attention to who the most influential people in our society are, which is why the most prominent voices are so often the most delusional. I'll add that they're also in lockstep with each other. There are filters in place designed to keep anyone from rising to positions of influence if they don't support the consensus worldview promoted by the oligarchic empire, and once they do rise to influence, they are actively herded into echo chambers, which reinforce that worldview. This is further exacerbated by the fact that the most influential voices in a violently capitalist society will be those who have profited and benefited from the status quo. Of course, they're going to believe the system is working fine. It treats them like royalty. This is why you can't defer to recognized authorities when it comes to understanding your world. The system which selects and installs those authorities is designed to serve the powerful, not to tell the truth. The responsibility for understanding your world is yours, and yours alone. Here's a tweet by Caitlin. Bomb without an air force and you're a horrible, evil terrorist. Bomb with an air force and you won't even make the news. That was in reaction to a tweet by Sarah Abdallah. Breaking! Israel is dropping bombs on Damascus, Syria in the middle of the night as Syrian families are sleeping. Whatever. And then I'll end reading the article here after the point is made that I wanted to make about yesterday's show. Poverty is a weapon of the powerful. Keep people too poor to fund political campaigns and you keep them powerless. Keep them too busy to research and they can't see through your propaganda. Keep them desperate and you can get them hating each other instead of hating you. They're not just robbing ordinary people so they can have more for themselves. The poverty itself actually benefits them. They would benefit from keeping you poor even if it gave them nothing else. It is not a coincidence that the most crucial nation in the oligarchic empire, the US, has the highest level of this kind of weaponized poverty. There's a lot of power riding on what happens in America, so the powerful do everything they can to keep Americans under control. Not only, Caitlin, are they too busy to fund political campaigns, but they're too busy to jump into the streets and start riots. And they're also probably too busy to understand what's going on well enough so that they could do a general strike and make it work. We talked a lot yesterday in the Frank Analysis live stream about the need for general strikes. But before a general strike can happen, we have to know what we're demanding, and then we have to coordinate that strike. In short, we have to have a lot of information before we can make it work. We have to disseminate a lot of information to a lot of people, and they have to have a unified view on what's going on and what should best be done. If you keep people too busy and too poor, they won't be reachable by the kind of anti-propaganda it would take to get this to happen. Now I'll turn to an article called What Happened to the Squad? The collapse of the progressive cohort shows change won't come from within the Democratic Party. That was another big point from yesterday. This is by Leonard C. Goodman, co-owner of the Chicago Reader. Says Leonard, I signed up for the COVID-19 vaccine on a public health website and got my 2 shots at a Salvation Army facility on the northwest side of Chicago. The site was efficiently and competently run. The experience provided a small glimpse into how a true national healthcare system, like they have in other developed countries, might look and feel. No one demanded to see my insurance card or sent me a bill. Of course, the reality of the U.S. healthcare system bears no resemblance to the system that delivered vaccine shots. Millions of Americans can't afford to see a doctor when they get sick, either because they have no insurance or because their insurance is substandard and they can't afford the thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket deductibles and copays. 1 in 4 Americans avoids necessary medical care due to cost, while 2/3 of U.S. bankruptcies are caused by medical bills. Despite promises during the campaign to reform the system, the election of a Democrat to the White House in 2020 has not brought us closer to universal health care. The Democratic Party markets itself as a champion of the issue, but this is just propaganda. As Caitlin would say, this is just narrative management. Behind the scenes, the party rakes in healthcare industry cash and protects industry profits. For example, instead of just paying healthcare bills directly, the government pays health insurance companies to issue policies with no guarantee that the recipients will receive actual care when they get sick. In the last election cycle, Democrats outpaced Republicans in collecting donations from the healthcare sector. Democrats hauled in $286.5 million from health insurance companies, big pharma, and hospitals, compared to $165 million for Republicans. President Biden led the pack in individual recipients from the industry. President Biden led the pack in individual recipients from the industry, collecting $60.8 million compared to $30.4 million for Donald Trump. In the House, 125 Democrats have signed on as co-sponsors of a single-payer bill, also known as Medicare for All, or M4A. But this bill, originally introduced in 2017, has never cleared a single committee, much less made it to the House floor for public debate or a vote. As the Huffington Post explained in a revealing article, the act of co-sponsoring a populist bill like M4A in today's Washington, D.C. doesn't necessarily mean the lawmaker supports the bill. Oftentimes, their sponsorship is just aspirational messaging, meaning they support the idea of universal health care so long as there is no chance of the bill becoming law. The likelier single payer is to become law, the more some Democrats, who once viewed supporting it as a cost-free gesture, will have second thoughts about putting their names behind a bill that is so strongly opposed by major donors to the party. Our healthcare system, designed to maximize profit, barely functions in the best of times. Now in the pandemic, the wheels have come off. Millions of Americans have lost their employer-provided health insurance. Others, as the New York Times reported last month, have found their lives and finances upended by medical bills resulting from a bout with the virus. And even healthy Americans with good insurance are starting to see that a healthcare system that discourages sick people from going to the doctor is highly problematic and puts us all in danger. Consequently, M4A is more popular than ever, favored by 85% of Democratic voters and about half of Republican voters. Yet, Democratic Party leadership still refuses to even hold hearings on the bill. Biden's plan to deal with the crisis is to give more taxpayer money to health insurance company giveaway programs like COBRA and the ACA. Early in the pandemic, President Trump promised to have the government pay everybody's COVID bills. This promise quickly vanished after health insurance companies saw it as a major threat to their industry. If Americans saw our government paying COVID bills, they might demand the same for other illnesses. Then pretty soon we would have M4A and no one would need private insurance. To stave off the threat, insurance companies volunteered to cover COVID bills. But then, as the New York Times reported, the insurers gamed the system to protect their profits, first by manipulating billing codes to avoid coverage of COVID-related illnesses, that's nice, and then by just declaring COVID over and ending the program. Meanwhile, Congress has done nothing to protect working people buried in medical debt. What happened to the squad? Just a few years ago, Democratic voters elected a group of progressives progressives who promised to go to Washington, D.C. and start a political revolution. Led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC of New York, the squad promised to take on the corporate wing of the Democratic Party and fight for programs that benefit working people over the donor class. First on their list was M4A. It is sad to report that in just a few short years, the squad has collapsed into a puddle of excuses and Twitter spats. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has demanded all hands on deck to protect who? The party's donors in this unique time of crisis, and the squad has fallen in line. As I wrote in a previous column, because of the Democrats' slim majority in the House, just a handful of progressives had the power to demand a vote on Medicare for all if they chose to exercise that power on behalf of working people. We also talked about that on last night's show. AOC and her colleagues did not force a vote on Medicare for all. Instead, they stood with Pelosi and the donors in keeping the bill off the floor of the House. The squad did finally coordinate their votes last month, but it was not to help working people. Rather, 3 out of 6 squad members, including AOC, agreed to vote present to assure passage of a bill to increase funding for the Capitol Police. All 6 members of the squad told activist groups that they opposed the bill. AOC and the other abstainers spent a year chanting and tweeting that the police should be defunded. But yes, that's chanting and tweeting. That's not actually action. But then behind closed doors, they coordinated their votes so the bill could pass by a 1-vote margin. Even worse, and I've mentioned this in a recent show, the squad have run interference for President Biden, discouraging their millions of followers on social media from demanding that he keep his campaign promises. Biden has already abandoned every promise he made to working people, including a $15 minimum wage, a public option to compete with the for-profit insurance industry, forgiveness of student loan debt, lowering of the Medicare eligibility age, and a promise to negotiate drug prices. Yet AOC asserted that Biden has exceeded her expectations, while Representative Pramila Jayapal gave Biden an A grade for his performance thus far. What passes for the left in the Democratic Party has mastered the art of performative resistance. Performative resistance. They tweet out anti-establishment rhetoric, but behind closed doors, they play for Team Blue, which means they play for Team United Healthcare, Team Humana, and Team Raytheon. The collapse of the squad shows that change will not come from inside the Democratic Party. Not now, not ever. The 2 corporate parties that control Washington, D.C. are rotten to the core. It is a fool's errand to think that we can make the Democrats fight for working people while the party's major donors are telling them to keep the status quo. And now I'll pause before I get to the last sentence because it's bogus and remind you of what we said on Frank Analysis last night. It's a fool's errand to support third parties if the point of the third party is to elect politicians. The only point for a third party is to organize people into striking and protesting. So now I'll give you the final sentence in all its glory. It's time for progressives to walk away from the Democratic Party, yes, and support a third party that is free of corporate influence. And again, I'll point you back to the Frank Analysis live stream of yesterday that there's no third party that's ever going to be free of corporate influence because it's legal to buy off politicians. Any third-party people are just going to do what AOC and the squad have done. Movement for a People's Party in particular is not going to get anybody that's going to do any better than Justice Democrats have done. If we don't use force in the form of strikes and protests to change the laws, to force the current politicians to change the laws, then there's never going to be a time when politicians will do the right thing. It's pointless to try to elect anybody while it's still possible to buy politicians. Meanwhile, stay tuned for a panel discussion that's going to happen around the brouhaha surrounding the MPP and Nick Brana. There's a lot going on in Jimmy Dore's backyard, and a lot of the dirty laundry is about to be aired.